A very good afternoon, dear participants and Dr. Tomar. We come to the third and final part of the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceuticals today. And in this lecture L4, we will also see some other miscellaneous applications. In the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceuticals, the final part is going to deal with the strategic tumor targeting. We saw how exciting it was to be able to do any metastasis to do with the cancer in different parts of the bones. And then instead of bones, anywhere in any part of the body also, using either the bone specific or the fluorodeoxyglucoside. But there was always this interest. Can we very specifically, if you take one particular type of tumor, and for that alone, can there be a target? And whether we can image. What can be an advantage? In such a case, such an imaging can also be attempted for subsequently therapy because you now have a specific targeting molecule. So if you put a diagnostic radioisotope, you can do imaging. And if you can put a therapeutic isotope, you can do a therapy. This was the kind of the interest. And one of the very early on thing was the biochemical moiety. Many antigens are associated with tumor. Therefore, they are called the tumor-associated antigen TAAG. Just for example, in the case of ovarian cancer, there is one such antigen for which they have a code name. That code name is, immaterial. You can ignore it. But for a particular cancer, there is an antigen. If that antigen will be there, then its binding agent will be its counterpart antibody. And that antibody could be raised. And that antibody, you can label it with either radioiodine or a radiometallic element that could be used then as the targeting part. This was an extremely elegant concept, and therefore, world over, there had been a plenty of interest. And for virtually close to 3 decades, 25 to 30 years, lots and lots of efforts have gone in. But unfortunately, in this case, these antibodies are very large molecules, around 150,000 Daltons. Such large molecules have in vivo extremely slow pharmacokinetics. Even though the principle of this antibody going and binding to the tumor-associated antigen and therefore targeting the tumor was real, in physical terms, practical terms, to be able to get a radioisotope like what we are interested in, iodine, technetium, and be able to do an imaging, this was extremely difficult. It did not really much take off. But there had been a limited success. One of them is for one particular tumor, lymphoma. There they are using the yttrium-90 based one particular antibody isotope. This was in fact used for the therapy itself. You could have used it with indium-111, then it will be for imaging, and the beta emitter yttrium-90, if you use, it would have been for the therapy also. But a fallout out of the large molecule problem was they recognized we can't go with a binder which is so large like antibody. Why not some other kind of a binder? Something like a relatively simpler peptide, synthetic peptides, 4, 8, 12, whatever it is, the number. You try to do a peptide, and if they have an affinity in any particular part of the tumor, like what are known as receptors, and these receptors can bind to certain amount of the peptides, and this could be like used, and that was the kind of a concept. And one of the particular peptide name is that octreotide. And we also saw the particular tumor, that is the neuroendocrine origin tumors like pancreatic cancers. They have the somatostatin receptor overexpressed. And this somatostatin can be bound by the octreotide. So your strategy is to take the octreotide, put your radio label with that. So then that carrier is your octreotide, you have the radioactive material, and that goes and locks on to the particular tumor site. And then that you are able to target the tumor. This was the kind of the concept. And in this particular instance, for the pancreatic cancers, the somatostatin receptor, it's also expressed in some other cancers also. But since clinically it will be known what is the patient's problem, this becomes an extremely good approach. And unlike the antibody, the smaller molecule peptides as the carrier for targeting the tumor became a big success. Indium-111 was the first M3 element which was used, but around the same time, we were also getting into medical cyclotrons, and the positron emitters were becoming popular like gallium-68. And also the PET was no more a very exotic imaging agent. positron emission tomography in the last 20 years has become a regular place one. So the arrival of the PET availability, medical cyclotrons, you can access a positron emitter isotope, which gives you superior images. So that had made the wonderful thing of the peptide-based imaging of tumors extremely a very nice one. The entire history is about 10 plus years, maybe about 12, 15-year history is what it is. And you have the counterpart to the gallium, the therapeutic nuclide lutetium, then it can go for the therapy also. So the therapy success is about only 10 plus year, whereas gallium-68 use has been there for nearly now 15 years or so, but much more so in the very recent years. This is extremely the important development in the entire strategic tumor targeting. Here you are looking at very specific tumors, the neuroendocrine origin tumors, pancreatic, certain amount of gastrointestinal tumors, etc. They could be done. The parallel developments were important, the cyclotron availability, and that is creating a very large number of PET, and therefore gallium-68 availability from the generator. And its chemistry is a bit tricky, but because of the interest, those chemistry issues were solved, and there could be rapid synthetic modules for making the compounds. You remember, this is the DOTA molecule, which I showed you in the previous lecture. In this particular place, amongst the 4 nitrogens and 2 of the carboxylates, the gallium gets complexed, or in the case of lutetium, if you use lutetium comes here and gets complexed. So this kind of the chelation possibility using this particular cyclic compound. There are many other carrier molecules, many other linker molecules. It need not be only DOTA. When we talk about one which had worked, it means there were several others which had been tried, which could have had different degrees of success also. We only talk about the success stories, but it does not mean the others have not been used. They have all been tried, and that very effort of looking for that kind of a suitable linker molecule is an extremely important R&D project arrangement, and plenty of professors, universities are working on such things. This is again a scopeful area for both doctoral and postdoctoral type of positions. Essential, PET-CT becoming commonplace in the last 20 years, gallium-60's chemistry being very well tackled, managed, and doing. You have now got gallium radiopharmaceuticals for tumor imaging, very regular use. Like the picture here shows, you get images, and also much more things could be there. For example, here you are seeing a picture of a particular patient. In the baseline, you can see this is the liver picture. This lot of these dots, they are all the tumor mets. And the patient has been getting lutetium-based dotatate therapy also in that. And after first cycle, after the third cycle, you can see the number of these tumor mets in these pictures have very much significantly reduced. So you are able to show by the imaging the progression of the removal of the tumor mets also on that. And this gallium lutetium pair being able to be used with the same targeting molecule, that is that octreotide analog, which is called the TATE, and then the DOTA as the linker molecule. So the same vector being used for both diagnostics and therapy is what has got the name theranostics or theragnostics. What we are doing here is integrating the imaging and therapy. We are using the same probe, same vector molecule to target the tumor. You are carrying with that an imaging isotope when you are doing the diagnostics, mostly PET, because the PET has got a very superior quality image as well as quantitation possibilities, and then the beta emitter, or as we will see very briefly, even an alpha emitter like actinium-225 could be there. So the pairs of gallium lutetium or gallium yttrium, if the tumor is a relatively larger one, deep penetration with yttrium will be possible, and also the alpha emitter actinium is also possible. These are the type of pairs of nuclide, and the doses used for therapies are about few hundred millicuries, and it's also given a couple of cycles, not just once. It may be repeated after some time by progressively monitoring the patients. And this has been one of the important development contribution success in the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceutical within the last 15-20 years. This, from the neuroendocrine tumors, we will move on to another of the case, which is a very, very difficult cancer, particularly in the men. It is because it's the prostate cancer. This has a very large incidence depending on the country. For example, in USA or Japan, probably that's the second or third largest. In India, probably still the head and neck cancers are much more predominant in men. But with longevity, there is a much greater scope for the people to be getting the prostate cancer in our country also. And that's a very, very classic difficult situation in terms of the treatment management. It's in that context, a very nice contribution had been possible from nuclear medicine and radiopharmaceutical. Once again, one of the marker here for the particular tumor, prostate cancer, was what is known as prostate specific membrane antigen. This is an antigen present on the prostate cancer patients. So the usual thing of the antibody attempt was made, and it had not been obviously successful. Same thing, the very large molecular weight probes, and therefore the very poor kinetics, it did not work, etc. Instead of looking here around for the peptide and other things, the same antigen, fortunately here, has also got other kind of properties. For example, it has got a certain enzymatic role also. This antigen has also got an enzymatic role. Therefore, instead of raising only an antibody to target that, if you could have any kind of an inhibitor which will prevent its enzymatic action, that inhibitor can probably be the target. That was the concept in using the PSMA-based binder ligands, because antibody has failed, and also it was known that it had not that successfully worked. So what was required here was to look for certain simple, nice binders, which vector inhibitor, which will prevent the enzymatic action, and in the process, they will target the same PSMA. That enzymatic part inhibitor development became the success, and in a very critical, important group of prostate cancer patients, the METS imaging could be done with gallium. It is the same isotope gallium, and here you are having an enzyme inhibitor as the target molecule here, and a suitable linker molecule, because for the chemistry to attach the radiometal, you need a suitable one. Like here what is shown in the red, that's actually the linker molecule to take. And this particular part, this is the inhibitor. This is actually a urea-based compound, which is acronym-wise, it is called HBEDCC, but that's immaterial. Essential to know that it is again a peptide type of a thing, and it is called gositotide. And that particular ligand will be capable of inhibiting that enzymatic action, and therefore that ligand will be carried to the PSMA, and PSMA is sitting on the prostate cancer. Therefore, you have targeted the prostate cancer. So that METS imaging, like what is shown in this particular picture here, is what had made extremely an important contribution, because to manage the prostate cancer patient, any kind of a therapy model to be given may involve an external radiation, and it is very important to know the precise location of the metastasis so that the radiation therapy can be given to that particular. Of course, we can also use, like what we did in the case of neuroendocrine pancreatic cancers, an attempt to use the lutetium here. That has also been done. We are going to see that soon. But in addition, even without you are doing a nuclear medicine therapy, the imaging itself of the prostate cancer patient's metastasis is an extremely significant contribution nuclear medicine radiopharmaceutical could do, and that had helped a very large number of thousands of patients. It's approved by most of the countries, FDA or equivalent insurance companies pay that, because you are able to do the management of the prostate cancer patients extremely nicely. In order to attempt the nuclear medicine therapy, instead of this kind of a ligand, another ligand coming back to the DOTA, because that gives you a much stronger binding. And when you are using a therapeutic nuclide, you would like this complex to be as stable as the possible one. And therefore, the DOTA based, it's only again the same DOTA based one, and the lutetium is taken here. And that linker ligand is codenamed as PSMA 617, and this is known as PSMA 11. So this PSMA 11 for imaging and PSMA 617 for the lutetium-based therapy has made a tremendous impact in the prostate cancer management of the patients. And so much so, the whole thing has become now a very regular procedure purely for the imaging part. Imaging is regular. The therapy using the nuclear medicine procedure is still in the offing. It is not yet there. This is a picture of the PSMA11 image in a patient with metastasis. You can see from the picture part like how badly the spread of the cancer is there. Like the PSMA 617 has been used in hundreds of millicuries, but invariably this has been in an extremely advanced cases, because right now the diagnostic procedure is a completely well approved, thousands of patients undergoing. The therapy is still under a clinical evaluation type of modality. The patients belong to still the radiation oncology group, but some of them where there has been virtually no other hope, such kind of people have been sent, and the results with the lutetium based this therapy mode, the same targeting route, that here it is another peptide, so the name is slightly different, and that has actually given an extremely important contribution. And the dosimetry can be calculated because the lutetium imaging is possible. Very significant results, even in the advanced cases, much greater longevity has been able to be shown. So what is expected in future, because this entire history is hardly 3 to 5 year history, what is expected is in future, just like the gallium-based PSMA11 imaging is now a standard of care procedure for prostate cancer patients, maybe for a certain group of prostate cancer patients, the lutetium PSMA 617, or even better, the actinium-225 PSMA 617 may become a procedure in future. That is still to be in future. Right now, the therapy mode has been well demonstrated. Very large clinical trials have taken place, but it is yet to become a regular procedure. Whereas the diagnostic part with the cancer thing like has already become a thing. This is one of the pictures. This is the particular kind of a location of a very difficult to locate one of the prostate CA cancer patients metastasis, and that had been after 2 cycles of treatment completely removed here. That kind of a very, very crystal clear results have been there. These are extremely difficult cases of patients who are already in their, kind of the terminal cases, but the ability to treat them and show and prolong their longevity has been significant. So it's hoped that here the dose total given was 12 gigabecquerel of the lutetium activity. In future, this could probably be a major contribution of it. Having seen such good success with the lutetium therapy in the prostate cancer patients, and also that enzymatic activity inhibition, what I said, is actually also involving an internalization process in the cell. Once there is an internalization process, the alpha emitter like isotope can have a great role, and therefore this alpha emitter 10-day half-life actinium-225 has attracted the attention. The same linker and the binder vector 617 is used instead of lutetium. It is used with actinium-225, and once again they have been able to demonstrate in clinical evaluation trials world over in multi-clinical studies excellent good results. Of course, this isotope is a bit difficult to right now access. Limited quantities are available, but people are expecting this is going to become extremely a large demand isotope. So very large budget projects are already going on multiple modes of production of it. Recall the nuclear reactions. There is a reaction called spallation, and that is what is used here. High energy protons are thorium-232, or cyclotrons you can use for radium-226. Radium is a difficult target to use, but they could be done like, and therefore there is a large interest in this isotope, particularly for the prostate cancer and also possibly for the other kinds of things. So this is the excitement in terms of a new contribution. So if we covered 50, 60-year-old iodine, we are also just touching upon at least one of the great important contributions of the very recent ones. I should also add some caveats about the theranostics. That is the same probe being used for both the diagnostic part and the therapeutic part. It's very nicely explained, easy, but in actual reality, there can be a problem, particularly because the excretory route dose, with a diagnostic, it always doesn't matter. Whereas when you are giving a therapeutic dose, the excretory renal burden can be extremely a problem. And many patients whose renal functions are not okay, they will not be able to take that kind of a therapy. So the critical feature will be the excretory route part, particularly considering the therapeutic doses from the patients what are being given. With diagnostic, this may not be an issue at all. Same way, no material goes only to your target organs. there are inevitably non-target tissues very similar to your target tissues. So they will also take up some small material. For example, some of those PSMA binder, what I said, they also go to the salivary gland and as well as to the lacrimal gland in the patient. Therefore, these are called inevitable non-target areas. There is no way you can prevent them. So there will be some radioactivity and some radiation dose burden there. And this again in a diagnostic setting may not matter. In therapeutic it could. And these all will have to be addressed. They are being addressed. The idea is to say that nothing like 100% goes only to your target, nothing goes elsewhere. So this is there. In addition, finally, cancer itself is a tremendously myriad type of a disease. It need not behave the same way in every patient. That creates also additional complications. So while principally, conceptually, I have told about strategic tumor cure getting a lot of success which has taken place, we should also keep in mind that there are other kinds of challenges which are all being addressed because of the overall benefit result what we are contributing is extremely high and therefore people are doing. Now, this is a list just to show what are all the various major therapies that particularly in the cancer setting, which the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceuticals give. This is almost like a summing up of the individual slides which we saw. We had 2 slides on the thyroid with iodine. Then we had 2 slides on the bone meds pain palliation. We now saw the neuroendocrine pancreatic cancer type of thing and the prostate cancer also. I have just now sort of told you. These are all the few things which are listed. There are also some things in italics reading HCC therapy, and that also limited use. So limited use HCC therapy is another kind of a nuclear medicine procedure, which we will briefly touch upon and cover. And also there is one more therapy procedure, which is for a non-cancerous setting. Those 2 alone we will very briefly touch. So they are included here because they are part of the cancer therapy nuclear medicine, but there is a subtle difference. What it is, we will be seeing in a moment. In the case of a certain type of a liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma it is called, instead of a targeting, because there is a provision to be able to send your radioactivity very directly to the tumor site itself. It so happens the liver cancer, this particular thing receives bulk of its blood flow directly from the arterial, intra-arterial blood, which hepatic artery, which goes to feed the liver. Much of the other things of the liver part gets it from the portal vein. This is a little difference, I am told, in the medical terminology. And therefore, instead of you are targeting to put through the intravenous normal route and expecting the material to go to the liver cancer, you will be able to administer the material directly in the hepatic artery. But that will involve then what we call as an invasive procedure. You will have to actually do what is known as catheterization type. And then that's what is given here, intrahepatic artery catheterization, which is called an invasive procedure. But the advantage is here, you are not looking for a molecule or so to be the carrier or a vector. Instead, you are sending some particulate microsphere material containing the radioactivity directly go and embed into the tumor site so that it will be able to give some therapeutic dose. This is again not a very large volume procedure. This is for a very specific small group of patients because they cannot undergo any kind of a surgery. That is why it is called actually unresectable hepatocellular carcinoma. That's a very small group who are otherwise suffering. So a small benefit of whatever could be given as a treatment through the nuclear medicine had been possible, and limited amount of this procedure had been done. The radiopharmaceuticals used here can be the microspheres based on yttrium-90, or it could also be certain other amount of viscous materials. 2 of them are called one of the isotope is iodine-131, another is rhenium-188. This is going with a particular chemical compound, viscous liquid lipiodol. Essentially to tell, in addition to the targeting route, taking advantage of a well-known feature of the blood flow to the liver cancer, this particular liver cancer going from the hepatic artery, you are doing an invasive catheterization procedure. In the normal nuclear medicine, we said it all goes through the systemic route, that is your oral or intravenous injection. From the blood, it goes to the target organ. Some reaction takes place, then it is held up. Instead here, this is actually loco-regionally delivered. Here taking advantage of the hepatic artery being the primary source of the part, and you are attempting. Therefore, multiple expertise interventional cardiologist, everybody will be needed. It is not a relatively simple procedure, but just to complete the picture, one slide I have put on that. This is the non-oncology, non-cancer setting. If nuclear medicine has done a role, that has been in the case of certain kind of the inflammatory joint pain, like in the knee joint or finger joint, elbow joint, etc. People with arthritis develop, and there are the conventional method of treatment also. There is some setting in which some of these people have no more ability to be treated by surgery or chemo drugs like. And in such cases, the radioactive material, radioactive colloids, are directly injected into that affected joint itself. That is why it is also called the local delivery. Particulate formulation of 1 to 10 micrometer type of colloidal particle with suitable radioisotope. It's only a small activity quantity, and depending on the size of the joint, for a larger joint means you take the higher beta energy tritium or rhenium, and medium means about 0.5 or 1 lutetium 177 isotope, and still smaller joint like can be another isotope, erbium, which has got only a 0.3 MeV. So there are different beta energies available. Such colloids like could be instilled into that joint and kept immobilized for about 24 to 48 hours. This radiation dose ensures that there is a certain amount of it prevents the excessive proliferation of the synovial membrane, and that gives rise to some pain relief and improved joint mobility. This is also helpful in the case of patients having painful bleeding into the joints, what is called the hemophilia. In these two groups of cases, the selection of patients is a critical one. The doctors, clinicians know which are the patients who will benefit. And in such patients, this kind of a colloidal material, radiotherapeutic colloidal material, is locally instilled. And one picture which is shown here, like how is the procedure done here and what's been the kind of the benefit. Here the isotope is yttrium-90 and the particulate is hydroxyapatite, which is actually a bone constituent, but in a very small quantity of about 1 to 10 microsphere pieces are instilled. And this is the pre-therapy scan, bone scan of the same patient. This is the extent of the problem here. And that 3 months post-therapy and 6 months post-therapy, the same bone scan here like is showing you a much better improved situation in this particular patient. This is not a panacea. This does not work for all the groups of the patients, which are the type of patients the clinicians judiciously select based on various parameters. But in terms of the radioisotope radiopharmaceutical, our procedure-wise, what we are providing there is through this particulate, and different energy materials are available. And that's so we complete the therapy part here. The one example, second example of non-cancerous setting. The first example of non-cancerous setting was the hyperactivity of thyroid, which is called hyperthyroidism or the Graves' disease I told you. Then that is of course through a systemic route. And this is here the synovial inflammation being curtailed, but here it is not injected, but it is actually locally instilled into the exact trouble spot itself. And that again is an involved procedure, but that's been of a limited and good help. We come to the winding up part of the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceutical topic. And because I'm sure most of you will be cricketers or at least love cricket right now, IPL is going on. So I'm sure many of you must be following. So I want to give you some analogy to it, but that's a bit later. There are those black letters text here, which is like the summing up text that you can simply read it yourself. You don't have to explain that. But what is important is what we have seen through with the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceutical contributions are, there are some cases where very unique contributions are being made for a certain patient management. Then there are cases where we are giving a significant value addition. For example, in the case of, I told you, the thyroid cancer, the iodine treatment, it is very unique. That's extremely helpful. And when you come to the fluorodeoxyglucose tumor imaging, that's of extremely significant utility. You can take again the myocardial perfusion imaging. It's an extremely unique role that what you are able to show the viability of the myocardial cells, etc. Whereas in the case of other things, very useful. For example, we talked about the kidney scan, renal function studies, etc. That's also very helpful. But probably wherever the radiopharmaceutical nuclear medicine use has become unique or significant, or where we can add more and more into that, that's what is going to make it much more practically helpful. That's why I said further advances will be focusing more and more on the first and second. But you don't directly get, I mean, you have varieties, so it will go into. So I would say whatever we saw as the various applications, you may be able to do your own analysis to decide, okay, I will put it into unique or I will put it only into very useful and so on. So that becomes like, one very good area. And we do have these very huge number of diagnostic procedures, PET, CT, SPECT, therapy, theranostics as they emerging. This is the kind of the overall summing up of it. What's about the thing like, so, the whole field, I take it like a cricket team. Right now, probably fluorine 18 is your great opener batsman. Fluorine 18 is the opening bat. Gallium 68 is the very important one-down batsman. But what is the solid middle order batsman? That is the technetium 99. Yeah. Because at any given time, the third, fourth down person who is going into bat in the team becomes the very strong one to hold on to the whole field. And that is still being done by the technetium 99. And a steady bowler you need who will bowl overs and then keep taking wickets in any kind of a pitch or anything. That's iodine 131. So that provides you the very basic strength of the part, and that is there. Then you do need medium pace bowlers. So lutetium 177 is your great medium pace bowler emerging, which has been helpful to the cricket team. And comes now an ultra pace bowler, actinium 220. 5, which is going to be the additional armamentarium into the entire nuclear medicine, radioisotope, radiopharmaceutical team. The idea is that you do need a full team of 11 people plus a 12th man. Sometimes a traveling team means you carry 14 or 16. So there is always scope for the other isotopes, be that samarium, be that copper 64 or other things like. It's in a kind of a lighter vein I am saying, because it will be easier for you to be able to grasp and correlate, link when you see and make an analogy of it. Therefore, I thought I should put that. And last but not the least, there have been some people whose inputs in the form of slides, images, more for illustration purpose. The technical part we can talk. So that has come from a large number of my physician friends and young scientists who are currently in the BRC and other places. So with that, we will close the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceutical topic, and we are shifting to the outline of the other miscellaneous applications type, what we are going to. And basically there, it's just this slide only recalls what we had seen in L1 of our lecture, namely the 3 aspects, basic principles. We are using radiation energy to produce certain desired changes. We can use the radiation as the tracer or a probe sensor to be able to use for certain developments, and also the radiation attenuation. So these same 3 aspect principles are what will come in one after the other, the few general applications. These are again in healthcare area, therefore we wanted to include as a part of this course, but individually we will not be covering them in any great detail to the extent we did the nuclear medicine radiopharmaceutical, or in the L5 what we will be doing regarding the radiotherapy. But there are some very important usage and importance, therefore at least as a knowledge information, basically you will carry. There is an equipment called blood irradiator. So from the very name you can make out that it's an instrument made to irradiate the blood. Why irradiate the blood, and what is the isotope? Isotope used is the cobalt 60 or cesium 137, because I told you for imaging you will take short half-life. For an equipment you will need a long half-life, because once you have an equipment it can stay there in the hospital or the medical center for a few years. In the normal blood transfusion, I go as a donor and I give, it can be given to the other person, no problem. But if the recipient will have any kind of a problem in terms of their compromised immunology properties, if their immune system had been compromised or deliberately it has been suppressed. For example, in order to do some transplants, sometimes you deliberately bring down the immunity of the patient. So in such kind of what's called immunocompromised patients, when blood has to be given, that can create what is known as a transfusion-induced graft versus host disease, and that patient can develop a lot of problem. So to prevent that, a small amount of radiation dose is given to the blood to be transfused, and this ensures that it inhibits the lymphocytes proliferation, which is what causes the risk of this host versus graft versus host disease. So in order to do that, very small amount of 25 to 35 gray dose is needed, and an equipment which is used conventionally for radiation chemistry research. This is the kind of system. And for example, I can show it here. So this is the chamber in which it is there, and then the material will go down here. This is a well-shielded area where the radioactive source is there, and the source can be cobalt-60 about 700-800 curies, or it could be cesium about 2,000 to 3,000 curies. They will give a kind of a radiation dose field of about 10, 11, 12 gray per minute. And you can keep up to 3 bags. And if you give for 2 to 3 minutes, that would have given this dose, and then the blood can be used for the transfusion. This is a very routinely going on procedure in many blood banks and hospitals for the select group of patients. But of course, earlier when we didn't have this equipment in India, it had to be imported. But because these radiation, the same system is what is used for any radiation chemistry work, these are known as gamma chambers or gamma cells. Only thing is, there for research, you may need even much larger dose rates. Instead, here what is needed is relatively into the lower level of dose rate. So such equipment has been made by the BRC's unit, the Board of Radiation Isotope Technology, and they do take the cobalt-60, but here the half-life is 5.2 years. So once in about 10 years, at least the equipment has to come back, get a fresh source and go back. Whereas if you will use with cesium-137, that is a 30-year half-life. So practically one generation, one lifelong like that instrument need not actually have. And that type of a thing has also been made. And right now in India, it is said that there are about 40 units cobalt-based are available. This comes from the proven technology of the cobalt-60 gamma chamber or gamma cell, which has been there in the bark since probably 70s. Of course, the technology advances have been continuously taking place. Knowing the problem of 5-year half-life, every 10th year or so the equipment to come and go back, one of the changes done is to look for the 30-year cesium. And there, once again, the Indian advantage, namely that we are having a closed fuel cycle, and therefore we are reprocessing the spent fuel. We have a lot of cesium stock, and that cesium could be used. What is another great advantage is the cesium that we recover from our waste stream, we are getting it in the vitrified glass form. So you are getting cesium glass as the source, whereas in the case of cobalt-60, it will be a metallic pellet or a metallic sphere as the source. And here it is a cesium-137 vitrified glass. This provides an advantage because in the very early imported units, the cesium used was in the form of cesium chloride powder, which is vulnerable in the event of any accident damage or any malified action of somebody damaging the equipment. There can be problem. We will briefly touch on such kind of a scope of the radioactive sources in the 5th lecture when we talk about categorization. So there is a general trend and feeling, any source which is vulnerable to be kind of, used for malified intentions, such kind of equipment or the source should preferably be kind of removed from, regular common use, because this could unnecessarily give rise to some security issues. So therefore, there was a fear, but the cesium in the form of a vitrified glass is not in that same bracket, like easily dispersible or creating a havoc. So it's a technology solution also. You get a long half-life, long shelf life for the equipment, and also technologically, unlike cesium chloride, this could be. So this has been another of the development. And the blood irradiators, currently about 20 plus units of the cesium-based totally indigenous technology equipment are being used. But of course, these are only required in those kind of high-end the third tier type of medical centers where they are performing certain procedures on highly immunocompromised type of patients. And for them, if there is a blood transfusion needed, then only it is needed. Otherwise, thousands of routine blood transfusions, there is no problem, nothing need to be done, there is no irradiation, nothing required. We move from the blood irradiation into this topic of radiation sterilization of healthcare products. We are all knowing that, medical products, we talk about syringes, needles, somebody in your house undergoes a surgical procedure, operation. Then there are those sutures that, the knives to be used, incision made, and subsequently, sutures to be stitching the part, etc. Much of these kind of materials these days you would like to have as once through or disposable. Many of them do come from materials of plastic or other organic and compound origin, and they are not stable to heat to be done the conventional sterilization. The conventional sterilization is the steam sterilization type or a heat-based sterilization, and that cannot be done for most of these materials. So there, one is a chemical treatment, ethylene oxide, another is the radiation. And the radiation dose required is in this case 25 kilogray, very large amount. You see, we talked about blood inactivation with 25 gray. This is 3 orders of magnitude, because here you have to achieve absolute sterilization feed. And generally the level which is needed is 1 in 1 power 1 in million. That means the chances of anything remaining unsterile will be 1 in 1 million. That is the sterility assurance level needed for medical purpose, and that can be done by this radiation. It's the effective alternative to the chemical element ethylene oxide treatment, which has certain toxic residue and other problems. But world over, currently the market is more or less equally divided between radiation and ethylene oxide, because the radiation plant, the material is processed and brought, whereas ethylene oxide could be part of many of the pharma or the medical device manufacturing companies. So those materials which can be managed, they are still doing. So around 50% of both the materials are being done. A very, very large number of amount of the medical products have to be done. And this is how the plant will look like. You have a very large radioactive source here, that is the red one shown here. There is a labyrinth through which these materials in the final finished packed form goes, and they move, and only the speed of the movement and the time of residence, they all stay for an equal amount of time on both sides, and then they come out on the other side and they are removed. The calculated arrangement of the transition time and the radiation dose level from these sources will be such at the end of it, it would have received 25 kilogray. Majority of these plants are all using the cobalt-60 sources, and this is actually a cross-sectional view of one such plant, just to show you the principal procedure. Like there is a labyrinth, and these doors, entry points, have their own interlocks, so nobody can get in, because this radioactivity inside here will be quite lethal, but the materials require that radiation dose level in order to get sterilized. We had a plant in India. This is one I told you about. 50% of the medical products are getting sterilized by this. We had a plant in India, Isomed, way back in 1974 under an UNDP project. It was a 1 megacurie cobalt-60 plant, and that also prompted the indigenous efforts to be able to do the cobalt-60 production. And that is how in many of the power reactors, which are working for very, very long continuous operation, the long half-life isotope like cobalt could be produced by India. And we had the indigenous resource, and this particular technology then had become very popular, well utilized, and some of the pictures of the thing, this particular plant is currently having almost served, it's in its last phases, it's under a long prolonged shutdown now. And this gave rise to a lot of other medical and pharma industry, medical product industry growth also. Since you have the end sterilization by radiation possible, many of the pharma and medical product device companies could enter into manufacturing many of those kind of products, be it gloves, syringes, needles, sutures, you name it, and the surgical cotton, and surgical, the robes for the operation theaters, and so on and so forth. Very, very large amounts could be done by that. Also, it gave rise to certain additional value addition product. Only one product for the sake I have just mentioned here. There is an hydrogel wound sleeve. Here, what you are doing is you are bringing about a chemical reaction cross-linking also in the same process of sterilization. So the three chemicals which are required to form the particular gel are mixed, and they get cross-linked and also sterilized through this procedure, and you get what is known as the hydrogel. That hydrogel can absorb a very large amount of the moisture, and this has, it will then be able to give slowly the moisture to the wounds and still allow the oxygen to flow, and that became an extremely important wound dressing. Such technologies developed have been taken by private companies. Many people are making it, like, just to show again by the principle. We talked about chemical changes and biochemical changes. Sterilization wise, microbes killing is a biochemical process. Chemical process is the cross-linking. The two together is giving you one particular product. This is one of the company's brand name, Hyzal. Today, you have more than 15 plus plants in the private sector in India, thanks to the initial technology development and the technology continuing support, as well as the indigenous cobalt-60 sources. The Indian nuclear power program is an extremely important component, because that is what has given the strength to your ability to be one of the few large-scale cobalt-60 producers in the world. There are only a very handful of such producers, and we have that. And therefore, the gamma radiation plant technology and private, whoever has been having an interest, it's there. Dr. Arun Sharma would have talked to you about the food preservation, spices, disinfestation, etc. Many of these 15 plus plants, they handle both. They do handle spices type of material for disinfestation for export, as well as medical products, devices for the sterilization sector. Because as we go into the hospitals and come out after surgery or so, you do not want to have a cross infection, and therefore the material should be once through throwable, and such kind of things have been facilitated through the use of the radioisotope and the radiation based technology part. So this radiation processing with reference to medical product sterilization, sometimes this is taken as an industrial application also, even though because it is for healthcare I included. Perhaps you will again hear it from Dr. H.J. Pant when he talks in a brief manner once again as an industrial application. Because if you want to be an entrepreneur, go about and induce some companies, and then you go to a region where currently these 15 plants are not there, you may be able to set up a radiation plant. Of course, you have to go through all the procedures, but you will be able to run a good show of having that kind of a facility, and that makes a very important interesting. The next two examples are purely for the principal part, because as the title itself says, evolution to sunset. Sunset because the technique is no more currently being used. So one could have easily said, then why put it at all here? But the principle, we talked about the radiation attenuation, radiation transmission, that coming from a radioisotope for a kind of a body-related measurement is interesting. It was done way back, and therefore we thought just to include it. It once again comes to your bone mineral, because the osteoporosis, which is a bone-based disease arrangement, its better management is looking for the bone mineral loss at a very early stage. In any kind of a suspect patient group, whether it is actually having bone mineral loss or not, if you will be able to do it in a very simple methodology, it would be nice. What could have been a very simple procedure? You take a radioisotope which has got a relatively very low energy radiation emissions, and if they go through the bone, you know the required amount of bone density, then you know how much will be the attenuation. If the bone mineral density is low in that patient, there is going to be a greater transmission of radiation, and therefore there will be a greater signal on your sensor plate. So using this principle of radiation transmission of relatively small activity sources with low energy emission, iodine 125 was available. So very early on, a radioisotope based bone densitometer concept was thought of, and it had been used, and it could be used for some of the type of the bones, what we call the peripheral bones. Then they recognized, instead of using only one gamma and one attenuation, if you will have a dual energy, relatively one lower and one slightly higher energy, then your accuracy, your ability to do the sensitivity of looking for the bone mineral loss will become more, because you are now having a differential transmission, differential absorption arrangement. So this is what gave rise to dual energy absorptiometry. So there one of the isotope was the gadolinium 153. It has got 41 and 42 emissions in one side, and 97 and 103 emissions in the other side. So it provides you practically around 40 keV and around 100 keV thing. And again, also isotope wise, it's about 248 months half-life. So the equipment source will be strong enough for a certain duration. So this became another. Again, purely for the principle's sake, the radiation transmission attenuation decided upon by a certain known expected bone mineral density versus any reduction there, letting more radiation go through, and therefore that being able to be quantified and be able to measure the patient's bone mineral content, and that helps as osteoporosis measurement. This could now be, of course, much more easily done by a very relatively specific X-ray equipments. So similar to the single photon isotope like iodine 125, the single energy X-ray, and equivalent to the dual gamma photon from the gadolinium dual X-ray, these instruments have now come. They have virtually completely replaced the radioisotope-based bone densitometer. They are no more in use. Bone densitometers will be there, but the word RI-based will need not come there, because they are actually going to be X-ray-based ones and that particularly the dual X-ray one is currently the gold standard. The technique is still important. That's the point. The very early ability to show through the radioisotope, in fact, gave rise to developing a much more sophisticated machine with the X-ray based ones. So the principle being demonstrated by that gave rise to a better one. The very same thing is what will apply in the next application. So the isotope earlier used were iodine 125, gadolinium 153, and cadmium 109 also. Cadmium 109 is also equivalent to iodine 125. It's got about 22 keV gammas and a fairly long half-life, just for the sake of principles. We move from there to this other application, which is probably people would have expected. Maybe even 10 years back, if this lecture was being given, we would have talked much more on that. But today I'm being absolutely crude and rude to it by just showing one single slide and also calling it pinnacle to historic value. It wasn't the pinnacle of glory up to certain point of time, because the technique was, in fact, the discoverer of the technique won the Nobel Prize, Dr. Rosalind Yalow. This is essentially to measure some important hormones in the body system, and it uses the principle of a competitive binding arrangement. What you do is the particular antigen, the hormone to be done, which will be present in the sample analyte or your particular sample, patient sample, and you make a radioactively labeled the same hormone material as the tracer. So the antigen or the analyte to be labeled, you already have the material you are able to do with a radioactive tracer. So that is your tracer material. And now you react it with varying amounts of the standards, varying amount of increasing amount of the standards if you are going to be using it like. Then along with the increasing amount of the concentration, the amount, the possibility for this labeled antigen to bind with them is going to be a competitive process. The more and more this is there, the less probability of this getting into getting bound in that fraction. So we will then be able to have a situation, because this amount of fixing material, the antibody, is again fixed, limited. The reagent, which is in this case the antibody, that is going to be limited. The tracer used, this is also limited. The only varying amount is either in the standard or in the sample, where the antigen level will be much, much increasing. So in such a situation, like, since these two are fixed, like, the ability of how much of this tracer would have been in this bound fraction will be inversely related, and that is what is shown by this graph. I do not know like whether you are able to see that, and there will be the fall in the graph with increasing amount of the antigen concentration. The bound fraction will be continuously coming down. This competitive binding assay, relatively simple reaction of the three reagents, and then an ability to do a separation. The separation could be done either using physical means or once again using another biochemical means. This particular illustration shows the biochemical means of using a second antibody to do the precipitation, but this could very well be done by other physical means. Suffice to know that you will be able to separate what is bound with the antibody and what is freely still floating as the tracer. Freely floating tracer versus antibody bound tracer, these two components you will be able to measure, and therefore once you have constructed a standard curve, any number of unlabeled sample material could be run through and you will be able to find. So a very large amount of hormones, be it the thyroid hormone, fertility related hormone, a very large number of hormones. Of course, the entire discovery was related to using insulin, but subsequently the technique could be extremely elegantly used for a very large number of hormone analysis. So much so it was an extraordinarily huge business. Once such huge business proposition is there, definitely there is the industrial analytical industry's ability, and they came out with the alternates to the radiometry. Instead of using the radioactive tracer, you can have a fluorescence label to the antigen or a chemiluminescence label to the antigen. So then at the end, you are not going to measure the radioactivity part, the bound and the free part, not the radioactivity, the bound or the free part, chemiluminescence or fluorescence. So those equipments are also very sophisticated method available. There have been that excellent, sensors available to do, and they have completely now taken over the radiometry. But radiometry is the starting point because it could show that's an extraordinarily useful one. Even today, most of the people will not refer to the fluorescence assay or chemiluminescence assay by a different name. They will call it as only still RIA because it has become that kind of a household name or a generic name like, and therefore it remains in that manner. This new word what is used is nuclear derived assays. The original transition was coming from a nuclear radiation property. Therefore, you call them nuclear derived, but the sensors are chemiluminescence, fluorescence. So those big industries, medical analytical industries, they are providing you the complete reagent, equipment, everything in one go. Even though very small amount of radioactivity is involved in this type of subject, you do need a certain procedures to be approved, followed because of the radioactivity, etc. Such things are not there with the fluorescence chemiluminescence. So much so, very limited amount of only the radioimmunoassay procedures are used. They are still very helpful. They can be done. There is no problem. A lot of automation and everything had been done. Once again, these reagents have been available. Training courses have been done. But what we call that, the kind of going into oblivion or obsolescence, that has taken place over with the radioimmunoassay. Otherwise, this was a great subject in till about 10, 15 years back, almost for 20 years. Late 70s, I think they got the Nobel Prize with reference to the radioimmunoassay. Rosalind Nello, the same book which I mentioned to you of the Ian Cass, nuclear sciences based Nobel Prize winners, you will be able to see. As I said, we are doing really very, very poor justice to a great field, because today in the current one, like they have gone beyond the radioisotope usage, and our course is on radioisotopes in healthcare. So we leave that. But we would like to finish on a positive note. If bone densitometer or the RIAs have moved out, like in one of the early ones, where very early on we had very limited role, and now we have a very big role. Very early on in the drug development evaluation, a lot of carbon-14 or tritium labeled compounds could play some amount of a role, and they were being used. But the carbon-14 tritium have very low energy betas, and their radiation detection wise are using will be by autoradiography, liquid scintillation, counter, etc. The ability to detect very sensitively, the problem will be there. With radioisotope label, generally there was a greater possibility, iodine was available and all, but it did not that much take off. But the moment the positron emitters came, positron emission tomography type could be available as a much superior quantitation and high resolution imaging instrumentation. There has been a great interest in the drug development research to shift from that very limited amount of a carbon-14 tritium based work to using radioisotope labeled, particularly fluorine-18 or other products. Because in conventional drug development, screening of candidate molecules is an extremely time and resource consuming one. And that is what makes many of the products, medical products, extremely expensive because of the kind of the investments which has to go into that. So the radioisotope based compound today help pharmacokinetic studies, biodistribution profile, and comparison amongst select candidate molecules. So which could work better, which will not work better. This will all be known in the research angle of the medical company which is developing, pharma company which is developing, but they are getting an excellent tool now to do use with that. And that superior PET imaging with small animal systems and the quantitation, that has given rise to an ability to be able to screen candidate molecules very early on, drop a few or take only the few which could go. So the moment you are reducing the number of molecules to be totally evaluated in a big way, it's an excellent large savings in cost and time. And this particular area is a big industry of the pharma, and many of them work with universities. Again, an area where a lot of doctoral, postdoctoral research. Of course, the work will be on a contract research mode for the pharma company. The very main compound or that principles will never be known. But in order to do many things, the professors will need students. There would be a lot of scope and plenty of research funds. In fact, in the positron compound, the developments is coming from such kind of sources. The synergy between pharma company and academic centers, this is now providing a large amount of R&D resource support, because you are able to now show the pharmacokinetics using suitably radio labeled positron isotope labeled compounds and using the imaging systems. Like there are two types of situations in which we could, beyond the conventional pharma. One is all the support to the conventional pharma development is what is their role. It is not anything to do with your own, radiopharmaceutical or nuclear medicine. But these as a tool towards the conventional pharma development. I mentioned to you about the cancer patient's ability, our ability to show by imaging the tumor mets that you are able to show that indeed the patient is responding or not. This again is a very objective assessment with reference to the effectiveness of the chemotherapeutic drugs. And that's again a kind of a drug development research support. The greatest interest currently today is in the degenerative neurology diseases. the neurologic dysfunctions, degenerative diseases for which there is still not a cure, but an early detection can help retard the progression of the disease. That could be done through using the drug development research part of it. And that is another area where a large number of work in the drug development companies part is taking place, and particularly the neurologic dysfunction being monitored by the PET and therefore supporting the drug development research. So both radioisotope as a tool as well as the nuclear medicine imaging as a procedure is contributing a lot to the drug development evaluation. So this completes the second part, which is the miscellaneous applications part. And therefore, it also brings us to the end of the fourth lecture. And I will stop here to take any questions from you. And we will see in the fifth lecture, the radiotherapy, the cancer management directly. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.